I'm very sorry I arrived late last night because I had an engagement in Warsaw yesterday where they had a rather large climate conference looking, of course, at Katowice and the COP meeting in about a month's time. And there I was confronted by some of the discussions or some of the issues we have discussed here today. A government not really in the forefront of policy making in this area. Some of the regions in Poland really cemented or stuck in the old economy. Coal being important not only for energy production but also for a lot of materials. And the employment aspect, of course, very, very important. And also a country who is dead scared, or seems to be dead scared, about energy security. So any hint about, moving away from what they know to something different is measured around what does it mean to security of supply? How much can we rely on this? And I also sense that the issue of policy making in a country like this, and the fact that what we would call nationalistic or ultra-right parties gain influence more and more makes these kind of issues even more difficult to deal with. Because to many people, we have to realize that the energy transition and the transformation of other sectors to address climate change or carbon emissions is seen by many as a threat to their livelihoods, to their jobs, to their traditional way of working and being. And I think that's going to be one of the critical issues for the European Union in the years to come. How to establish a constructive dialogue with these kind of people and not dismiss them as skeptics or denialists, but rather realize that here are people who are threatened by the transformation that we talk about so much. I understand that Sean really did a wonderful thing last night by really showing the bigger picture. And it's not only the IPCC 1.5 degree report. By the way, what I learned from Jean-Pascal van Ypersele yesterday, who was one of the speakers together with me, was because I referred to the 2-degree target and the 1.5 degree target. And he said, there is no 2-degree target. There is a below 2-degree target. And to me, he said, that cannot be more than maximum 1.75 degree target. So anyway, but those are the particular challenges for us here. But I believe Sean is absolutely right also to refer to the WWF international report about a week ago about the fact that we have wiped out 60% of land-based vertebrates over the last 45, 50 years. And in this book that I wrote with Ernst von Weizsäcker a few months ago, Come On, we have another measurement of that. We make the point that if you measure the body weight of all land-based vertebrates, humans, our pets, and the husbandry, and wild animals, the wild animals make up less than 3% of that body weight. And if we had done that calculation 100 years ago, I submit it would have been 35, 40% or something. So that's just an indication on how we are marginalizing all other species. And of course, in the process, posing an enormous threat to biodiversity. So the bigger picture should be with us all the time, and it leads to a recognition about the need for a mind shift, because we developed our institutions and our economic model when we were around 1 to 2 billion people, what we in this book call the empty world. And now we're living in the full world, with soon to be 8 billion, and a couple of decades from now, maybe 10 billion people. And for heaven's sake, how can we imagine that we could have more or less the same institutions, the same kind of thinking in those two different worlds? And the Commissioner this morning specifically referred to the silo-based institutions and decision-making. And that is a major, major problem. And when he tells you that he is visiting one of the capitals in the European Union and he has difficulty at the one and the same time to meet the three ministers he should talk to, environment, transportation, and energy, that just shows us that we need to change the way we address all these issues. The EU is rightly proud for having been at the forefront of climate policy making, but I would like to submit, and I live in Sweden, one of the countries who is looked upon as being really a champion. For heaven's sake, we have not cut our emissions by anything over the last 20 years, if we include consumption, international aviation, and emissions from shipping. Our territorial emissions are 5.5 tons per capita, but if we include all the rest, we have more than 10 tons per capita. And they've been more or less stable for the last 20 years. By that, I'm not saying that we have not done something. We have done a lot to prepare for a better future, and in particular in the field of energy. And here I think energy policy making in the EU has been quite progressive. The Renewable Energy Directive, the Energy Efficiency Directive, the Eco-Design Directive, the Buildings Directive, and of course the emissions trading system, although it has not worked yet, but hopefully it will start to work. So we have paved the way for a better system. But in all other sectors, we are doing exactly the same we did 20 years ago. Cement, steel, plastics, aluminium, textiles. Now, textiles is getting worse because it's more and more polyester. And agriculture, we are tilling the land exactly the same way. So we have really an uphill battle to bring about this necessary transformation. But the good thing is that we know what to do. And in many areas we have the technologies. Not in all areas, but in many areas we have the technologies. At least we have sufficient technologies to know where to start. But we need a lot of innovation. And as Kirsten keeps reminding us, systems innovation. And we are still learning. We saw on stage with Commissioner Šefčovič, Andrew McDowell, and Alex Raque of Lumo, we saw, I think, a very, very constructive piece of dialogue, and pointing out the synergy between public finance, private finance, and individual citizen-level participation, and working together towards the integrated solutions we need. And I must remind you that in order for the renewable investments to happen that need to happen, if we are going to have a chance to meet the targets in the most recent IPCC report, we need to triple investments in renewable over the next 5 to 10 years, the yearly investments. And that means going up from 350 billion euros or dollars per year to roughly 1 trillion. And most of it must happen in developing countries. Because as somebody said this morning, I mean, unless poor people have access to modern energy, they will continue to be poor. And if they don't have renewable energy technologies available, they will get stuck in the carbon-based economy. It's very simple. We cannot ask from these governments not to try to modernize their societies. So that's a tall order. And we also heard the other figure from the Commissioner. We need 180 billion euros per year over the next 12 to 15 years in order to, the EU, collectively, to meet the SDGs and the Paris targets. So we have some uphill battle when it comes to the scope of the challenge. I also think it was fantastic to hear the Commissioner this morning pointing at the role of the EU. And we should have as our mission to preserve the earth. Yesterday and the day before yesterday, we had representatives of the two major banks in Europe, Nordea and La Caixa, and they were calling upon us to revisit the purpose of the economic system and its social contract, and to focus the activities and efforts of their system on financing the changes that we desperately need to set in place for the next 12 years. And the European Commission, at least listening to the Commissioner today, is picking up on that challenge. And this, my friends, is going to be really, really a difficult debate, because it's going to be about profit maximization versus long-term sustainable investments. And there is a huge gap between the two. It's going to be between the short term and the long term, between the private and the public, or the common good. And it's going to be about why it is still profitable to invest in the wrong things, and how we can change that. And whether the new taxonomy from the European Commission that Sandrine is working on is going to help us, I hope, because it's going to be a tall order. So MissionFinance doesn't stop here. We will continue to build on what we've learned during these days and to help pave the way into a better future. We also have talked a lot about technologies, disruptive technologies, and the risk for stranded assets and how to balance that. And the fact that every time we make the wrong investments, we lock in developments for 20, 30, 40 years. That to me is maybe the biggest issue, to avoid lock-ins in the wrong technologies. And that, by the way, was one of the major issues yesterday in Warsaw. We have brought together in this summit over 500 people. Many of our partners are here, representing business, industrial and sector professionals, cities, universities, small and medium enterprises, entrepreneurs, researchers, students across a number of sectors. Kirsten started this conference talking about the legacy of our time together. And I think today it's the moment of a call to action. And I invite you all to follow through on the encounters and the ideas that you have all had here and build them into as clear projects as possible that we can help you take forward. Turn your ideas into something specific, relate them to something tangible, make sure they are big and bold and systemic in their design and in their impact. Bring them to us and come with us to convene the actors we need to implement and learn and to activate the financial support we need collectively to act upon them. We have talked about reframing and creating demand, and we have heard over and over again the need for intermediators to bridge demand and supply, intent and action, policy and innovation, public and private finance. We've also heard, not least this morning, that many projects appear to be too small to be able to be financed. How can we help bridge that gap? By pulling them together, by maybe using blockchain technology, and by offering platforms where investors, whether we call them impact investors or others, and entrepreneurs and innovators, bring them together. EIT Climate-KIC is a bridge. We invite demand owners to make this bridge work for you to access portfolios of solutions. And we invite both suppliers and consumers of innovation to co-create and co-shape demand with them and with us all together. So as we now come to the end of this event, I would like to remind you that it has served as a stage for a number of initiatives. The launch of a mission innovation call for innovative proposals that reframe demand and offer breakthrough solutions. That was Dennis Pamblin. The launch of the UN initiative on building a network for sustainable finance centres, in which Ireland will take a proud place as initiator and leader. And as well, acknowledgement of the efforts of the high-level expert group for sustainable finance, instigated by the European Commission to provide the standards, the taxonomy that we need to guide investments and economic activity in the future, and where Sandrine is helping us or representing us, Climate-KIC. Finally, now as we come to a close, I would like to honor the efforts that have gone into creating this event and to enabling the stimulating discussions and the exchanges that we have had. I would like to thank once again the Department of Finance of the Government of Ireland, marking the year of sustainable business finance, in particular Richard Bruton, Minister for Communications, Climate Action and Environment, who joined us yesterday. I'm sorry I didn't meet him. I also would like to thank Sustainable Nation Ireland and their CEO, Stephen Nolan, in particular, for his wonderful, energetic, committed and visionary support and leadership. I also have to thank once again our sponsors and partners, in particular BNP Paribas and Environment. When I read a paper like this, I don't do it well. BNP Paribas and Environmental Finance, EIT Climate-KIC, and the whole team. We have had fantastic keynote speakers. At this time, I would also like to thank most particularly all of our speakers and session hosts, with whom we would not have had such a rich and interesting program. And finally, I would like to recognize the hard work and dedication of the Climate-KIC team, who have put an enormous effort into bringing this conference together. You may ask yourself, where will next year's summit be? This Climate Innovation Summit has evolved as a concept. We have been looking at various topics over the last couple of years. This year on finance, last year on cities, the year before the ambition was primarily focusing on the Paris Agreement goals. We will review the outcomes of this summit over the next 2 weeks and make an announcement about the focus and location next year in January. I would like you to work with us on the summit next year or have ideas. If you have them, please get in touch with the team and in particular with Gina Lovett. After this plenary, we will still have some activities. We will have a number of working groups, one on landscape finance, which will be here. We had one very interesting this morning. We will have one on a city finance lab in the Podle room and adaptation finance in the courtyard. Renat Heuberger said to me this morning when I asked him what was his impression, he said, very good, very good. We talk a lot about transformation. I think people really understand the need for it. Next time we meet, we also have to show some very concrete examples of it happening. And it need not be ours, it can also be from others. And we have many, many solutions that are emerging all over the place. And I think we need to be as concrete as we possibly can, not least when we talk to policymakers, because otherwise they will be confused. Finally, I would like to close by reminding us of the words of Commissioner Šefčovič again this morning. He said many very good things. And one was, towards the end, he said, the next decade will decide if this century will be European, American, or Chinese. And that will depend on how many of our climate priorities we can transform into our trade relationships, into our economic redesign, and our young generations. And I think that's very true. We have a chance to really make change possible and take a leadership role, but it will require that we are integrative in our approaches and break down the silos and work much, much closer together over disciplines and sectors. Thank you very much. And again, and I said in passing, the EIT Climate-KIC team, of course, first and foremost, Kirsten.